Nathan Cole had everything: wealth, power, and a future designed for success. But when he sees Emily, his pregnant ex-wife, working as a waitress at his own wedding, his world shatters. Lies, betrayal, and the truth he never saw come crashing down. Is the baby his? Can he fix the damage he caused? Or is it too late? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The Grand Horizon Hotel shimmered like a beacon of wealth and power against the night sky, its towering glass structure reflecting the city lights. Inside, the grand ballroom was a spectacle of extravagance. Crystal chandeliers bathed the polished marble floors in a golden glow, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh roses and expensive champagne. The elite of the city moved gracefully between velvet-draped tables, their laughter a carefully measured melody of influence and pretense. It was a night of celebration, a night of triumph, and for Nathan Cole, it was supposed to be the greatest moment of his life. Dressed in a custom-tailored black tuxedo, Nathan stood at the far end of the room, watching the scene unfold as if he were an outsider looking in. He adjusted the silver cufflinks on his wrists, a gift from his fiancée, Victoria Hayes, a woman as polished and flawless as the diamond ring she now wore. Everything about this night was perfect. Every detail had been planned down to the finest precision, the way Victoria liked it. His name, his reputation, his success. It was all on full display, cementing his status as one of the most powerful men in the city. And yet, beneath the layers of power and perfection, something gnawed at him. "You're hiding," a smooth voice purred behind him. He turned to see Victoria approaching, the very image of control and elegance. Her champagne-colored gown hugged her figure, her golden hair styled in waves that cascaded over one shoulder. She was beautiful, confident, everything a man like him was supposed to want. She placed a hand on his lapel, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there. "The guests are waiting," she said, her voice silk over steel. "They're here for us, Nathan." He forced a smile, the kind he had perfected in business meetings and high-profile interviews. "I was just taking a moment." Her icy blue eyes studied him, narrowing slightly. "You've been distant lately." "It's nothing," he lied. "Just thinking." Victoria's lips curved in a knowing smile as she wrapped her arms around his neck, her touch calculated yet intimate enough to remind him of the role he was expected to play. "You're probably just overwhelmed," she murmured. "It's a big moment, Nathan. You're marrying a woman who understands you, a woman who's on your level." The words settled uncomfortably in his chest, pressing against something he didn't want to examine too closely. A woman on his level. It sounded logical. It sounded right. So why did it feel so wrong? A memory surfaced, unbidden. A different woman in a different time. Laughter that was never forced. Dark eyes that once held nothing but love for him. Late nights in a tiny apartment filled with whispered dreams over takeout containers. Emily. He hadn't thought about her in months, or rather, he hadn't let himself. The past was neatly severed, left behind like an old chapter that no longer fit the story of his life. He had made his choice, moved forward, built an empire, and yet, her name still tasted like regret on his tongue. Victoria's fingers traced his jawline, pulling him back to the present. "Whatever it is," she said, voice gentle but firm, "put it aside for tonight. This is our moment." Nathan exhaled and nodded, shoving the memories back where they belonged. He offered her his arm. The perfect fiancé once again. The applause erupted as they stepped into the ballroom together, cameras flashing, glasses raised in celebration. Victoria smiled, basking in the glow of admiration, reveling in the whispers of envy around them. Nathan smiled too, but beneath the mask, the unease remained, a quiet ember smoldering in the depths of his chest. He made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, allowing himself to be pulled into conversations about power, investments, and exclusive ventures. But his mind was elsewhere, distracted, restless. Something felt off tonight, though he couldn't put his finger on what. Then, across the room, he saw her. At first, she was just another face in the sea of servers moving swiftly between guests, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. But then she turned, and the world around him stopped. Emily. His breath hitched, the sound of the party dulling to a low hum in the background. She looked different, thinner, her features sharper, as if life had taken something from her, but it was unmistakably her. And then he saw it. The slight curve of her stomach beneath the crisp white uniform of the catering staff. Pregnant. A slow, suffocating weight settled in his chest. His fingers tightened around the glass in his hand until his knuckles turned white. No, this wasn't possible. The divorce had been finalized over 6 months ago. If she was pregnant now, his mind reeled, piecing together implications faster than he could process them. Was it his? Had she moved on that quickly? Had he truly lost her forever? He set his glass down abruptly, ignoring the startled glance from the bartender. His feet were already moving before he could second-guess himself, weaving through the elegantly dressed crowd, his pulse hammering with every step. Emily hadn't seen him yet. Or maybe she had and was purposefully avoiding him. She moved with quiet efficiency, but he saw it. The way her fingers gripped a tray a little too tightly, the tension in her shoulders. The way she glanced toward the exit, as if contemplating escape. She was running. Not physically, but in the way that mattered. And he wasn't going to let her. She had almost reached the service corridor when he finally caught up to her, his hand closing around her wrist, not hard, but firm enough to stop her. She froze. For a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. He could hear her breathing, feel the way her pulse quickened beneath his touch. Slowly she turned. Their eyes met. And in that second, Nathan felt the weight of everything come crashing down on him. Regret, guilt, confusion. Emily's expression was unreadable, her dark eyes calm but guarded. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, someone she had once known but no longer recognized. Her lips parted, and for a brief moment he thought she might speak first. But then, without a word, she pulled her wrist from his grasp, her movements precise, controlled. And then she walked away. Not in a hurry, not as if she were afraid, but as if he didn't matter at all. Nathan stood there, rooted to the spot, his mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. His ex-wife was pregnant. She had never told him. And for the first time in a long, long time, Nathan Cole had no idea what to do next. Nathan drove through the city streets, his grip tight on the steering wheel, his mind a chaotic mess of memories and questions. The sight of Emily, pregnant, working as a server at his wedding, had shaken him to his core. He couldn't let it go. He wouldn't. The past wasn't supposed to come back like this. It had been neatly tucked away, buried beneath years of success and ambition. He had convinced himself that Emily was just a chapter he had closed, a necessary casualty of the life he had built. But now, staring at the road ahead, he realized something terrifying. He had been wrong. The memories came flooding back, unbidden, relentless. 5 years ago, they had nothing but a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, a second-hand couch, and a dream they shared over late-night takeout. Nathan had been a struggling software developer, burning through savings and maxing out credit cards to build his startup. Emily had been his anchor, his unwavering supporter, the one who believed in him when no one else did. He could still see her curled up on their threadbare couch, a laptop perched on her knees, helping him fix errors in his code, even though she had no idea what she was looking at. She'd bring him coffee at 3 a.m, reminding him to take breaks, to eat, to breathe. "You're going to make it," she had whispered to him one night, her fingers tracing circles on his wrist as they lay tangled in bed. "I know you are." And she had been right. He did make it. But somewhere along the way, he lost her. Nathan had always prided himself on making smart decisions, on knowing when to cut losses and move forward. But Emily, she was never supposed to be part of that equation. He thought back to the slow unraveling of their marriage, the way the cracks had started small, barely noticeable. Then Victoria entered his life. She had been introduced as a consultant, a brilliant strategist hired to help scale his company to new heights. At first, she was just a business partner. Sharp, ambitious, someone who understood the ruthless world he was stepping into. But soon, her presence became something more insidious. At first, her words were subtle. "You work too hard, Nathan. You need a partner who can keep up with you." Then they grew sharper. "Emily doesn't understand this world. She never will." And eventually they were a poison he didn't even realize he had swallowed. "You need to think about your future, Nathan. Do you really see her standing beside you 5 years from now? 10? He hated himself for how easily he had let those words take root. The fights with Emily started small. Missed dinners, late nights at the office. Then came the accusations, the resentment. She had tried to reach him, tried to remind him of who they were before the money, before the success. But he had already started seeing her the way Victoria wanted him to, like an obstacle. The night everything fell apart replayed in his mind like a scene he couldn't turn away from. Emily had been waiting for him when he came home, late again, exhausted, his mind full of numbers and projections. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, her face tight with frustration. "You didn't even text me back," she had said, her voice quiet, controlled. "I was busy." She let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "I get that, Nathan. But lately, it feels like—" "Like what?" he snapped, more harshly than he intended. "Like I don't matter anymore." The words had hit him harder than they should have, slicing through his exhaustion like a blade. But instead of admitting she was right, instead of reaching for her, he hardened. "That's not fair," he had shot back. "Everything I do is for us, for our future." Emily's eyes had softened then, but not in the way he wanted. There was no understanding, no patience, just sadness. "I never asked you to stop, Nathan," she murmured. "I just wanted to be a part of it." But he hadn't heard her. Or maybe he just hadn't wanted to. Because by then, Victoria's voice had already taken over. "You don't belong in this world, Emily. This—" The moment those words left his mouth, he knew he had destroyed something he could never fix. Emily had gone quiet. Too quiet. Then she had simply nodded, as if something inside her had clicked into place. "I see," she had said. And that had been the beginning of the end. The divorce came quickly, almost clinically. Victoria had been there through it all, offering support, reassuring him that he was doing the right thing, and he believed her, because believing her was easier than facing the guilt that gnawed at the edges of his conscience. He had never questioned why Emily didn't fight for anything. No alimony, no division of assets. She had just walked away. And he had let her. But now, as he pulled into the parking lot of his office building, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, he knew he had been blind. Emily had been pregnant, and she hadn't told him. Why? Had she wanted to keep it from him? Or had someone made sure he never found out? The suspicion crept in like a slow poison. Victoria. Nathan's stomach turned. He needed answers. He grabbed his phone, scrolling through contacts before landing on a name he hadn't called in over a year. Derek Hayes, one of his former assistants. A man who had worked under Victoria for years. The phone rang once, twice. Then a hesitant voice answered. "Mr. Cole?" Nathan didn't waste time. "Derek, I need to know something, and I need the truth." A pause, then a quiet exhale. "Sir, I don't know if I should be talking about this." "You should," Nathan said, his voice sharp, unyielding. "You worked under Victoria. You saw everything. Now tell me, was it an accident, or was it planned?" Silence. Then, finally, "It wasn't an accident, sir." Nathan's blood turned cold. The divorce, the way it happened, none of it was an accident. His jaw clenched. "What do you mean?" Derek hesitated. "Victoria, she intercepted things. Emails, messages, anything she thought might make you change your mind about Emily. She made sure you never saw it." Nathan's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of things?" "Letters," Derek admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "From Emily. She tried to reach you, sir. After the divorce, she wrote you multiple times, but Victoria had them intercepted. Said it was for your own good, that you needed to focus on your future." Nathan felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. "And that's not all," Derek continued, even lower now, as if afraid someone might hear him. "The photos, the proof that Emily was cheating." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. "They were staged," Derek admitted. "Victoria hired someone to make it look real." The office suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. Victoria had orchestrated everything. She had destroyed his marriage, and he had let her. A sharp knock at his office door made him snap back to the present. The door swung open. Victoria. She stepped inside with that same poised, effortless grace. A smile carefully fixed in place. "There you are," she said smoothly. "You left the reception early." Nathan stared at her, his heart hammering. The woman he had once believed to be his perfect match was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. He set his phone down slowly, his movements calculated. "I saw her, Victoria." Victoria blinked, feigning confusion. "Who?" Nathan's voice was deathly calm. "You know exactly who." For the first time, something flickered in Victoria's eyes, and Nathan knew, without a doubt, the war had just begun. Nathan didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows, his mind spiraling into a storm of rage, regret, and disbelief. Everything he had built, every decision he had made, had been manipulated by Victoria. She had orchestrated the collapse of his marriage, poisoned his mind against Emily, and worst of all, she had stolen the chance for him to know his child. His child. The weight of that realization pressed against his chest like a crushing force. Emily had been pregnant, alone, while he had been living under the illusion that cutting her out of his life was the right choice. And now she was back, carrying a child that, if the timeline was right, was undeniably his, and she had looked at him as if he were a stranger, as if he didn't matter at all. Victoria had stolen so much from him, but she wouldn't steal this. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his fingers tightening at the roots before he exhaled sharply. He had to see Emily again. He had to hear the truth from her lips, not through old letters that had never reached him, or second-hand confessions from a terrified former employee. He had to know why she hadn't told him. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, he was already driving through the city, his hands gripping the wheel with quiet determination. He had found her address through his investigator, a simple apartment building in a modest part of town, so far removed from the luxury he had drowned himself in these past years that it almost felt surreal. Emily had always been practical, grounded. She had never cared for wealth or excess. He used to admire that about her, used to think that made her better than the world he was trying to break into. And then, somehow, he had convinced himself that was a flaw. He pulled into the parking lot, his heart pounding. The building was old but well-maintained, a sharp contrast to the towering glass penthouses he was used to. He climbed the narrow stairwell, his footsteps echoing against the walls. The closer he got to her door, the harder it became to breathe. Then he knocked. A long pause, a shuffle of movement, and then the door cracked open just enough for Emily to appear in the gap. The sight of her hit him like a punch to the gut. Up close, she looked even more different than she had at the wedding. She was thinner, her face sharper, but her eyes, those dark, expressive eyes, were the same. They held the same quiet strength, the same fire that had once burned for him, only now there was nothing but distance and caution in them. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly, a protective gesture that sent another sharp pang of guilt through him. "Nathan," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. His throat tightened. "Emily, can I?" "No?" The door moved, as if to close, but he quickly placed his hand against it. "Wait. Please." She hesitated. He could see the exhaustion in the way she pressed her lips together, the wariness in her posture. With a slow breath, she sighed and stepped back just enough to let him in. The apartment was small but tidy, lived in. There were baby clothes folded on the couch, a few unopened packages stacked near the wall, a crib still unassembled in the corner, and on the fridge, pinned beneath a magnet, was an ultrasound photo. His chest ached. She had been preparing for their child alone. Emily crossed her arms and leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him with guarded eyes. "Say what you need to say, Nathan, and then leave." He turned to face her fully, his gaze locking onto hers. "I didn't know, Emily. About the baby. I swear to you, I had no idea." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't. That would have required you to actually talk to me." His jaw clenched. "I would have if I had known." "Really?" She cut him off, her eyes flashing. "You would have talked to me? Like how you listened when I tried to explain before the divorce? Like how you didn't even hesitate before signing the papers?" The accusation struck deep, because she was right. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice rough. "I trusted the wrong person. I believed things I shouldn't have. But Emily, I never would have walked away if I knew about the baby." Her expression didn't change. "Well, you did walk away, and I had to figure everything out by myself. So forgive me if I don't exactly trust that you suddenly care." The weight of her words settled over him, suffocating. He had left. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not knowing the full truth. But in the end, the result was the same. He had abandoned her when she needed him most. And now he had to prove that he wasn't that man anymore. "I want to be here," he said firmly. "For you. For our child. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm not walking away again." Emily studied him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then she exhaled and shook her head. "I don't need you, Nathan." The words hurt more than they should have, but he held his ground. "I know," he said, "but that doesn't mean I'm leaving." She turned away, pressing a hand to her belly, her shoulders tense. "I already know how to do this on my own." "I don't doubt that," he said quietly, "but you shouldn't have to." Silence stretched between them, thick with things left unsaid. Then, finally, Emily spoke again. "I don't trust you," she admitted, her voice softer now, but no less firm. "And I don't know if I ever will." Nathan nodded, accepting the weight of her words. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, if I have to." Emily let out a tired sigh, rubbing at her temple, as if this entire conversation was draining her. And maybe it was. Maybe it was for both of them. Finally, she turned back to face him. "I have an ultrasound appointment tomorrow," she said after a long pause, her voice neutral. "You don't have to come, but I thought you should know." He stilled. It wasn't an invitation. But it wasn't a rejection either. And for now, that was enough. "I want to be there," he said without hesitation. Emily didn't react right away. Then she nodded slightly and turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Nathan took the hint. He left the apartment, the door clicking shut behind him. But as he walked away, he made himself a promise. She didn't need him, but he was going to prove that he would be there anyway. Nathan arrived at Emily's apartment early the next morning, his heart pounding in a way he wasn't used to. He was accustomed to pressure, to high-stakes negotiations, to making decisions that affected billions of dollars, but none of it compared to this. This was real. When Emily opened the door, she looked surprised for a split second, before her expression hardened into something unreadable. She was dressed simply: jeans, a loose sweater that stretched slightly over the curve of her belly. Her dark hair was pulled into a bun, a few loose strands framing her face. "You're early," she said, her voice neutral. "I didn't want to be late," Nathan replied, adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit. He had chosen something more casual today, a button-down and dark jeans instead of the suits he lived in. He didn't want to stand out, didn't want this to feel like a spectacle. He just wanted to be here. Emily hesitated for a moment before sighing and grabbing her coat from the hook. "Let's go." The drive was quiet, filled with an unspoken tension. Nathan kept glancing at her, trying to gauge her emotions, but Emily remained distant, her gaze fixed on the window as the city blurred past. He wanted to say something, anything, but he didn't know where to start. How was she feeling? Was the baby healthy? Had she thought about names? They were all questions that felt too personal, too soon, like stepping onto unsteady ground. Instead, he focused on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. When they arrived at the clinic, The waiting room was filled with other expectant mothers, some with their partners, others alone. Nathan followed Emily inside, feeling strangely out of place among the soft murmurs of conversation, the faint sound of a heartbeat monitor in the distance. Emily checked in at the front desk, then took a seat, leaving the chair beside her empty. Nathan hesitated for a brief moment before sitting down next to her. Silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. Then, finally, Emily broke it. "You don't have to be here," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I didn't ask you to come." Nathan exhaled slowly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know. But I want to be here." Emily didn't respond. She just stared ahead, her hands resting over her stomach in a way that made his chest tighten. A nurse called her name and she stood, heading toward the hallway. Nathan hesitated again, unsure if she would allow him to follow. But then, without looking at him, Emily said, "Are you coming or not?" It wasn't much, but it was enough. Nathan stood immediately and followed her inside. The exam room was small, with soft lighting and sterile white walls. Emily lay back on the table, lifting her sweater slightly as the ultrasound technician prepped the machine. Nathan stood at her side, unsure where to put his hands, his nerves getting the best of him. Then the screen flickered to life. Nathan barely breathed. There it was, their child. The small, unmistakable silhouette on the monitor, the faint, rhythmic sound of a heartbeat filling the room. Strong, steady. His entire world tilted on its axis. Emily's gaze softened as she stared at the screen, her lips parting slightly. "That's the baby," she murmured, almost to herself. Nathan swallowed, his throat tight. "Our baby," he corrected, his voice rough with emotion. Emily stiffened slightly, but she didn't argue. For the first time in a long time, they weren't on opposite sides. They weren't fighting. They were just there, together, staring at the future they had created. When the appointment ended, Emily wiped the gel from her stomach and pulled her sweater back down. She took the printed ultrasound images from the technician, holding them carefully between her fingers. Nathan watched her. He had spent years chasing success, chasing power, believing that those things defined him. But standing here, seeing his child for the first time, he realized how much he had lost, and how much he wanted to get back. As they walked out of the clinic, Nathan finally spoke. "Emily," he hesitated, "thank you for letting me be there." She didn't look at him. It wasn't for you. But the fact that she hadn't pushed him away completely, that she had let him in, even for just a moment, meant everything. Nathan knew this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a clean slate. But it was a start, and for now, that was enough. The next day, Nathan found himself standing outside Emily's apartment again, a bag of groceries in one hand and a small box in the other. He wasn't sure if she'd let him in, wasn't sure if she'd even speak to him, but he had made a promise, to himself, to their child, to her, that he wouldn't walk away this time. Taking a steadying breath, he knocked. A long pause. Then the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open just slightly, and Emily appeared, her dark eyes narrowing when she saw him. "Nathan," she sighed, clearly exasperated. "What are you doing here?" "I brought some things," he said, lifting the bags as if that explained everything. Her brows furrowed. "Nathan." "I'm not here to argue," he cut in quickly. I noticed some things you needed. Prenatal vitamins, fresh food, and this." He lifted the smaller box. "It's a humidifier. The air in your apartment is dry, and that's not great for you or the baby." Emily stared at him, her lips parting slightly, but she said nothing. He waited. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, she stepped back, allowing him inside. The apartment was as he remembered it, small but warm, a space that felt lived in, the folded baby clothes on the couch, the crib still unassembled in the corner, the unopened bills on the counter. They painted a picture Nathan wasn't sure he was ready for. A picture of everything Emily had been going through alone. He set the groceries down on the small kitchen table, carefully unpacking each item. "I got the organic stuff," he said, attempting some form of lightness. "You always said processed food was the devil." Emily crossed her arms, watching him like he was some kind of puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. "Why are you doing this?" Nathan paused, setting a carton of eggs in the fridge before turning to face her. "Because I should have been doing it all along." She let out a humorless laugh. "And what, you think showing up with groceries makes up for everything?" "No," he admitted. "But it's a start." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. Nathan could see the exhaustion in the way she carried herself, the subtle way she cradled her belly, as if the weight of it was something she was still getting used to. Finally, she sighed and gestured toward the humidifier. "You don't have to do this, you know." "I know," he said, carefully unboxing it anyway. "But I want to." Emily didn't respond. But she didn't stop him either. That, at least, was progress. Over the next few days, Nathan continued to show up, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with small, practical things. One day it was groceries. Another day he brought over a set of maternity pillows after noticing how tired she looked. When a snowstorm hit, he arrived with a thick coat, insisting she needed something warmer. She fought him on that one. "I already have a coat," she said, arms crossed. Nathan held up the new one. "This one actually zips over your belly." Emily huffed, muttering something under her breath before finally taking it. "Fine." The real turning point came a week later when he showed up to find her kneeling on the floor, struggling to put together the crib. Instructions were spread out beside her, a screwdriver in one hand, a look of deep concentration on her face. The second she saw him standing in the doorway, she scowled. "Don't say a word." Nathan smirked, stepping inside. "Wouldn't dream of it." She huffed, but moved aside as he crouched down next to her, picking up the instruction manual. They worked in silence at first, the only sounds being the occasional click of screws fitting into place and the quiet hum of the city outside. Then, after a long moment, Emily spoke. "You know," she said, her tone almost amused, "I never pictured you doing this." Nathan glanced at her. "What? Assembling furniture?" "Being here," she admitted, "sticking around after everything." He tightened a bolt, considering his words carefully before answering. "I never should have left in the first place." She didn't respond immediately, but he saw the way her fingers paused over the wooden rail of the crib, her posture shifting ever so slightly. "You can't change the past, Nathan," she said finally, her voice softer than before. "But that doesn't mean I can just forget it." "I don't expect you to," he said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm not going anywhere this time." She studied him for a long moment, and for the first time since their reunion, she didn't look at him with anger or resentment. Instead, there was something else, something more fragile, more uncertain. Hope. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Nathan had never been the kind of man to believe in second chances. In business, mistakes were costly, and the world rarely gave you an opportunity to correct them. But standing in Emily's apartment, watching as she ran a tired hand over her belly, he realized that she, was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose again. He had spent weeks proving his intentions through actions, not words. It wasn't grand gestures or desperate pleas. It was consistency, showing. That afternoon, Emily sat curled up, being there. And maybe, just maybe, it was work in the couch, a blanket draped over her legs, her head resting against the armrest as she flipped through a baby book. The sight of her like that, peaceful, focused, made something deep in Nathan's chest tighten. He cleared his throat, setting a steaming mug of tea on the small table beside her. Chamomile, no caffeine. Emily glanced at the cup, then at him. "I can make my own tea, you know." "I know," he said, his lips twitching. "But you won't." She rolled her eyes, but took the cup anyway, mumbling something under her breath that he couldn't quite catch. Nathan took a seat across from her, watching as she traced her fingers absently over the page in front of her. "You've been reading a lot," he observed. Emily shrugged. "I just want to be prepared." A pause. Then, softly, "I don't want to screw this up." Nathan's stomach twisted. "You won't," he said, his voice firm. "You're going to be an amazing mom, Emily." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for the first time in a long time, he saw something other than resentment in her eyes. Something softer. Something he wasn't sure he deserved. "I had an ultrasound appointment yesterday," she said suddenly. Nathan stiffened. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily exhaled, setting the book down. "I don't know. Habit, maybe?" She glanced away. "I've done everything alone for so long that it just felt normal." His throat tightened. It shouldn't have been normal. Not for her, not for their child. "I want to be part of this," he said, his voice quieter now, more raw. "Every part of it. Not just the big moments, but the little ones too. Doctor visits, midnight cravings, kicking for the first time. I want to be there." Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for something on the table. A folded piece of paper. Without a word, she handed it to him. Nathan unfolded it carefully. It was an ultrasound image. Their baby. Small, fragile, but real. So real. His throat constricted, and, for the first time since this all began, the weight of it hit him fully. He was going to be a father. Emily watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "It's a girl," she said softly. Nathan blinked, his head snapping up. "A girl?" She nodded. Something inside him cracked wide open. A daughter. He had spent years chasing things that didn't matter. Money, power, influence. And yet this tiny life growing inside Emily was the most important thing he'd ever been a part of. He swallowed thickly, staring down at the ultrasound again, his fingers tightening around the edges. A girl. His daughter. "Have you thought about names?" he asked after a moment. Emily hesitated, then admitted, "A few." Nathan looked up at her. "Tell me." She exhaled, rubbing at her belly absent-mindedly. "I like Lily." Lily. It was simple, soft, beautiful. Nathan smiled, a real smile, not the forced, polished one he wore in boardrooms and interviews. "Lily," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It felt right. Emily's lips parted slightly, as if she were surprised by his reaction. "You like it?" "I love it," he said without hesitation. Something unreadable flickered across her face, and for a brief moment, Nathan thought she might smile too. But just as quickly she turned away, shifting slightly on the couch. "I still don't know if I trust you," she admitted quietly. Nathan nodded, setting the ultrasound carefully back on the table. "I know." Silence stretched between them, but for the first time, it wasn't heavy with resentment or pain. It was something else. Something fragile. Something like hope. And for now, that was enough. Nathan should have known it wouldn't be that easy. For weeks he had been making progress. Small steps. Little victories. Emily wasn't pushing him away as much. She still didn't fully trust him, but at least she was letting him be there. That was more than he had hoped for. But then Victoria struck back. It started with the headlines. Billionaire Nathan Cole's ex-wife resurfaces, pregnant and struggling. Is Nathan Cole's engagement off? Former flame could ruin his future. Scandal brewing, millionaire's ex-wife, expecting. But who's the father? Nathan saw the articles the moment they hit the news cycle. His phone exploded with calls and messages. Investors, board members, reporters, people he hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting a statement. And he knew exactly who was behind it. Victoria? Nathan stormed into his office, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. He didn't need to call her. She was already waiting for him, lounging in the leather chair across from his desk, as if she still belonged there. She looked up, a knowing smirk on her lips. "You've been busy." Nathan slammed the door behind him. "You did this." Victoria tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Did what? Alert the public that their beloved billionaire is suddenly playing house with his ex-wife? That's not my fault, Nathan. You made this mess yourself." His hands curled into fists. "Leave Emily out of this." Victoria scoffed. "Oh, please. The woman is carrying your child, working a dead-end job, living in a shoebox apartment. People talk, Nathan. All I did was make sure the right people listened." He took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep his fury in check. "If you think this is going to make me come back to you?" Victoria laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't want you back." Her expression hardened. "But I do want you to remember what you owe me." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "I don't owe you anything." Victoria stood, smoothing her dress. "We both know that's not true. Everything you have, everything you built. I was there. I cleaned up your mistakes. I turned you into a man people respected. Without me, you'd still be struggling in that tiny apartment with Emily, coding all night and living off ramen." Nathan's jaw clenched. That's where you're wrong." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You need me, Nathan. I'm the one who made sure you got where you are today. And if you think I'm going to let you throw it all away for her, you're even more naive than I thought." He met her gaze, his voice deadly calm. "Try me." Victoria's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then she turned, heading for the door. "Fine. If this is the path you want, don't expect it to be easy." She glanced over her shoulder, her blue eyes cold. "I'll make sure of that." And then she was gone. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He had known Victoria wouldn't go down without a fight, but he hadn't expected her to move this fast. He needed to warn Emily. When he arrived at Emily's apartment, she was standing at the kitchen counter, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when he entered. "I assume you've seen the headlines," she said flatly. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. "Emily, I told you this would happen." Her voice was eerily calm. "I told you that getting involved again would only make things worse." He stepped closer. "I didn't." She finally looked up, and the anger in her eyes made his stomach drop. "People are calling my job, Nathan. My boss pulled me aside today and asked if I was trying to scam you for money. My landlord suddenly wants to reevaluate my lease because reporters won't stop harassing the building staff. This," she gestured at the phone, at the chaos spilling into her life, "this is exactly why I didn't tell you about the baby." Nathan's hands curled into fists. "I will handle it." Emily laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How, Nathan? By throwing money at it? By making another public statement? This is my life, and you just let her tear it apart?" His chest ached. "I didn't let her do anything." She scoffed, turning away. "You didn't stop her either." Silence hung between them. Nathan took a slow breath. "Emily, please, let me fix this." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, she sighed. "I don't want your protection, Nathan." Her voice was softer now, but no less firm. "I just wanted to be left alone." Nathan's throat tightened. "And what if I don't want to leave you alone?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "I don't trust you," she admitted, "and I don't trust that this won't happen again." "I won't let it," he swore. She shook her head. "That's not a promise you can keep." Nathan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. For the first time since all of this began, he felt truly helpless. But he wasn't going to give up. He had already lost Emily once. He wasn't going to lose her again. Nathan stood outside Emily's door for what felt like an eternity. His fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight with frustration. He could walk away. She had given him every reason to, but something in him refused to move. He had spent too many years being the man who let things slip through his fingers. He wasn't that man anymore. But for now, he had no choice but to leave. As he walked down the dimly lit hallway, his mind raced. Victoria had played her move, but he wasn't going to let her win. He would protect Emily no matter what it took. The next morning, Nathan was already working on damage control. He met with his legal team, his PR advisors, and anyone who could help dismantle the scandal Victoria had unleashed. But even with all his power, money, and influence, there were some things he couldn't control. Emily's landlord was still considering terminating her lease. Her job was on the line. The press continued to hound her, and, worst of all, she refused to answer his calls. Then, just when he thought things couldn't get worse, he got the call. It was from an unknown number, but when he picked up, the voice on the other end was one he knew all too well. "Mr. Cole," the man said, voice hesitant, "you might want to get down to Mercy Hospital." Nathan's breath caught. "What?" "It's Emily Carter. She collapsed at work." The world stopped. Nathan didn't even remember the drive to the hospital. One moment he was in his office, and the next he was sprinting through the sterile hallways, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. When he reached the nurse's station, he barely got the words out. "Emily Carter. Where is she?" The nurse at the desk glanced up, eyes widening slightly at his urgency. "She's in room 312. The doctor is with her now." Nathan didn't wait for permission. He pushed through the door, and the sight nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. Emily lay on the hospital bed, her face pale, her dark hair splayed across the pillow. She looked so small, so fragile, and for the first time, he truly saw just how much she had been carrying, alone. Her eyes fluttered open as he stepped inside. She blinked a few times, then groaned softly. "Nathan?" He was by her side in an instant. "I'm here." She let out a weak chuckle. "Of course you are." Nathan swallowed hard, his fingers curling around the side of the bed. "What happened?" Before she could answer, the doctor entered, glancing between them. "She had a stress-induced fainting spell," the doctor explained. "Her blood pressure was too high. We ran some tests, and while she and the baby are stable for now, this can't keep happening." Nathan's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" The doctor sighed. "She needs to reduce stress, immediately. That means rest, proper meals, and most importantly, avoiding anything that puts strain on her body. If she doesn't," he hesitated, "it could lead to complications, preterm labor, work." Nathan barely heard the last part. His pulse roared in his ears as he turned back to Emily, who was avoiding his gaze. "You should go," she murmured. Nathan exhaled sharply. "Not a chance." Emily sighed, shifting slightly. "Nathan, I don't need you hovering over me." He shook his head. "You don't have a choice. You and Lily come first. Everything else can wait." Her lips parted slightly at the mention of their daughter's name. Nathan leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Let me take care of you. Please." Emily studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression cracked. Finally, she sighed. Fine. It wasn't much, but it was something. Nathan didn't leave her side. For the next few days he was there, through every doctor's check-in, every meal, every restless moment. And slowly, something shifted between them. One evening, as Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she finally spoke. "I was scared." Nathan turned his head toward her. "Of what?" She exhaled. "Of you. Of letting you back in. Of trusting you again." His chest ached. "Emily, I hated you," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. "For so long, I hated you for what you did to me. For what you let happen." Nathan's throat tightened. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto his. "But I don't think I hate you anymore." It wasn't love. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. And for Nathan, that was enough. For now. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. It means a lot to have you here, listening, feeling, and experiencing every moment along with Nathan and Emily. This story isn't just about lost love and redemption. It's about the consequences of our choices, the power of persistence, and the importance of fighting for what truly matters. Nathan learned too late that success means nothing if you sacrifice the people who stood by you from the beginning. And Emily, despite all the pain, showed that strength isn't just about surviving. It's about knowing when to forgive and when to let go. In life, we all make mistakes. We push people away, we believe the wrong voices, and sometimes we don't realize what we have until it's gone. But redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about proving, day by day, that we can be better than who we were. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you again. And remember, sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in boardrooms or on battlefields. They're fought in the heart.